before we start the Grapple Asia podcast episode, we want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors and people that support us. Softspot.Açaí. Kat has a little store now in Tonga, and they do some incredible acai. It's sugar-free, no preservatives, and they have little pop-ups around the place. They had a little pop-up in Paraground and Cortier recently, but they're mainly based in Tonga. They're available on Grab as well, and they do some great dairy hybrid options as well, and their nut butters are incredible. The pistachio one I highly recommend personally. Our sponsor is fightaesthetic.asia, and if you use code Grapple Asia, you'll get 10% off everything except from the Alpha Gi. So thank you to Aesthetic for always supporting us, and we actually do also supply them in Thailand with free shipping as well. And then our last sponsor or supporters is Staline.food, and they do high protein prepackaged meals, frozen. They do protein drinks as well that they can deliver. And if you use StayRate50, you'll get a little discount on delivery. And I highly recommend some of their flavored yogurt chicken protein drinks. They actually go down a lot easier than you think. So thank you very much, Staline. All right, so we're in probably like an hour outside of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia just now, and I've been lucky enough to be invited to Jozef Chen camp, and it's like an invite-only thing with Aesthetic, which is a UK-based brand founded, was it 2011, 2012?
Yeah, 2012 is when we officially launched, but yeah. I would say 2011 was when we started kind of prototyping and sampling.
Yeah. So my guests today are actually the two brothers that own the company, and they've actually moved back to Malaysia a few years ago, and hope they've been nice enough to sit down and chat to us. So Andy and Jon, thanks for speaking to me.
Thanks for having us.
So the first question is, how did you both start jiu-jitsu?
So when I was working in London, I took the Green Line, the District Line. I used to pass by Carlton Gracie, London. And growing up, we'd always been into martial arts and things. Spent a lot of time doing Shaolin Kung Fu and Muay Thai and things. Grappling was always on the radar, but never took in just because of the suspicious nature of what it looked like, maybe. And I had a friend who was an Olympic Taekwondo competitor, and she said, you know, hey, maybe you should give it a shot. And so I walked in, and then, yeah, absolutely loved it.
Yeah. So did you start roughly around the same time or a little bit later?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I kind of grew up with martial arts. I think I was more into kind of conventional sports like football, and I played a lot of rugby at uni. It wasn't really until Jon had started it, and he was like, you know, I've just started this martial arts, I think you really like it. And then he actually downloaded Gracie Combatives, and at that time we still lived together. So he ordered some jigsaw mats off Amazon. And we used to like basically go through the Gracie Commander system just on his computer, and we would practice the moves just in kind of our living room back in 2011.
Legally purchased.
Legally purchased.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Sorry, yeah.
Everyone makes a comment like that when that's one of their favorite instructional is. Yeah. So what was the inspiration to start Aesthetic then?
I think at the time, I think we've always been quite particular with the kind of clothes or goods that we choose to purchase, and I think when we kind of really decided that we wanted to do gi and you know, maybe looked at joining a gym and actually getting proper instruction, we kind of scoured the market at the time, and there wasn't really anything to our taste. Mm-hmm. So I think rather delusionally we kind of thought, hey, you know, we have some ideas for design. I have a bit of a background in design, and Jon actually was the one who was at the time spearheading this idea that he had for like a gi. And I think we jumped on Alibaba, and he was like, you know, why don't we just order a bunch of samples from some factories in Pakistan at the time, because I think the MOQs were pretty low, and so that's pretty much what we did. We jumped online, we messaged a whole bunch of factories, and then we would just filter by how communicative they were. So if they were speaking in good English, whether they were receptive to the idea of, you know, sampling these designs that we had in mind, and it just kind of went from there. I think Jon was, at the time, I think had some friends who were training in Carlton Gracie, and I think he said, you know, would it be cool if you tested out these gis to see if they're actually worth anything or performed well, and I think that's where we.
Yeah, I think it was, in addition to the design, it was probably the pricing. I couldn't believe how much a gi cost when I started, and I thought, you know, being being a bit of a Chinaman also, I thought, oh, I can probably get this cheaper if I source the product. And yeah, so Andy's being very modest. He's an excellent designer. Did a lot of design work when he was in uni, and so I thought, oh, you know what? If I can bring this to Andy, I think he can probably come up with something nicer, something cheaper. And then it kind of snowballed from there. We had a bit of money from our aunt for investment. She said, you know, here's a bit of money I set aside for you guys. Why don't you use it to invest in whatever you want? And then Andy and I had a discussion. Said, hey, maybe we can use this to bulk purchase a first batch of gis and see how they do.
Yeah, I think there wasn't really ever an intention to make it like a full thing. I think at the time we just thought, you know, we had a good relationship obviously as brothers, and we just thought it would be a fun thing to do on the side. Like we both had full-time jobs at the time. You know, John was teaching and I was working in advertising, and so we couldn't really see like time outside of that to really pursue it as a full-time thing. But it was just more of like oh, you know, it's something fun we could do on the side, and didn't really think it would grow as fast as it did, really.
All right. So the next question is, what influences or your artistic expression in the products, or are there any brands that you took inspiration from initially?
This is probably more a question for Andy, but the kind of stuff that I liked, I suppose in reference to the last question, was more clean designs, less loud, and at the time there was only, you know, the skulls and fireballs and things.
Yeah, I think we grew up playing a lot of sports, and we kind of grew up in, I would say, two really distinct eras of really cool sporting uniforms. You know, we used to be huge basketball fans in the 90s, and then we kind of transitioned to football in the 2000s. And so we grew up with kind of exposure to all these really cool sporting uniforms, and kind of, you know, they had very like distinct designs and like really kind of unique styles that we kind of really try and incorporate into some of the stuff that we do. And I think on top of that, we've been, you know, really fortunate to be traveling from a really young age. So we were exposed to a lot of different cultures. And I think when it comes to kind of approaching design for aesthetic, we kind of try and make it kind of, you know, represent like our experiences, like the cross-cultural nature of our upbringing, you know, design elements from the interests that we have, like the other sports that we kind of grew up playing, just to kind of mishmash of as much as we could to make it like a cohesive brand and kind of develop our own style, I would say.
Yeah, I guess the acid test is, we always say, would we wear it? It's just stuff that we would wear, that we would like to.
I think that's the thing, it's like we would only really design things that we ourselves would be comfortable wearing. And I think that's kind of, really kind of led everything, or kind of, yeah.
It's interesting. I remember started around 2011, 2012, and then I think I saw you guys immediately around that time as well. And it wasn't particularly Asian though. I didn't see much of an Asian influence on it. I just saw the symbols. In Japanese you say bigaku, but that was about as far as it went in terms of any kind of Asian influences. But yeah, I took to you guys immediately. But yeah, my next question is, when did you both realize you reached like global recognition, would you say?
I don't even think we really have, to be honest. Really? Yeah, I think we still have that kind of garage brand mentality, in the sense that it's still something which we feel is quite a small, kind of intimate thing that our team has, because we're still quite a small team, I would say.
I think I'm less modest than Andy, but it came relatively late on. I think probably when I was on the phone with Nicholas Merigali and he was expressing interest in working with us, I thought, oh, he wants to work with us, that's interesting. So yeah, maybe we're bigger than we feel we are.
Okay, let's just go to the Nicholas Merigali one. How, so he contacted you guys first in terms of sponsorship?
So Andy and I had a friend who we were working with in the States with the distribution of Aesthetic, and after we finished working with him and I kept in touch, and we kind of bonded over things like our kids playing golf and just keeping in touch quite intermittently. And one random afternoon he called me, and I don't get a call from this guy very often, and he said, "Hey John, you know, I've got this guy who might be a good fit for you. He's looking for a brand. You might have heard of him." I was like, "Who's that?" He said, "Merigali." So I was like, "Who's that?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds amazing. Let's see what we can do."
Yeah. In terms of working with athletes, sometimes you can have like your opinions on the person, or when you guys choose an athlete, are you looking at more their, let's say, competitive merits, or who they are as a person, or what do you prioritize when you're looking for sponsoring an athlete?
I mean, outside the world-class athletes like Maragali, I think the criteria for what we look for in an athlete has changed over time.
Yeah.
I mean, being good at Jiu-Jitsu is the baseline, right? And I think as we've evolved as a brand, we kind of prioritize the relationship aspect. So they have to be easygoing, we have to kind of like them. And more recently, we've been more interested in developing their brand as well as our brand. So we kind of grow together.
Yeah.
I think it's something that we focus on.
All right. Were you guys born and brought up in the UK, or did you guys move over to the UK when you were very young?
We were born and brought up in the UK,
okay.
yeah.
So we moved, we were born there. Dad was a doctor, a GP in a small village outside London, about an hour away. We moved back in 1993. So I was 10, Andy was maybe 4 or 5.
Yeah. Went to British schools.
Went
and
to tough
then
schools.
John went over for sixth form and I went over for uni.
Yeah,
and then I ended up staying there till 2018. Yeah.
And so I went back to Malaysia first to try and grow the brand in Asia in 2013.
Yeah. So what would you say are the unique differences between bringing your brand to Asia versus like the rest of the world? Because obviously you guys started in the UK. You've probably seen, okay, this is how you build a brand in the UK, but then when you come over to like Asia, for example, what do you see are like the major differences?
Yeah, so in places like the UK, a lot of the hard work is done for you in terms of people knowing what the sport is. So it would just be the difference between, I mean, you have trade-offs too, growing in a saturated market where people are already there, you're no longer the first movers. In Asia, we had quite a good opportunity being one of the first brands out in Malaysia, being able to really establish a foothold and grow into the Southeast Asian region from there.
Yeah, I remember getting hit out by Fight Aesthetic, SEA. I don't know who manages that account, but I remember I was based in Myanmar at the time, and then you sent me, I can't remember what the name of the gi was, but it was like purple and yellow branding, and really liked the fit as well. And later on when I moved to Thailand, I was really happy that I got to work with you guys down the line, so that was pretty awesome. So what are some of the unique challenges you face, like breaking into the Jiu-Jitsu apparel scene? I mean, let's say, obviously, Jiu-Jitsu is not as mature as, let's say, the UK, Europe, and the West, but like, basically, you guys are pretty much growing with the scene. So what do you say is like one of the more challenging things?
Yeah, I think in Asia, it's like John said, it was trying to grow and also try and educate a lot of people about what the sport is. I think, and I think when we're in a market where there aren't really that many competitors, you kind of have to look at your brand positioning a bit more and kind of really emphasize the quality aspect of it, you know? Because I think something that we've kind of noticed is that over time we want to be the brand that people choose rather than the only option that they have.
Yeah. And
so that way we have always tried to strive to make things as durable as possible from a kimono perspective, because I think within Asia it's a lot more expensive here to sell gis than it is in the UK, purely because of, you know, the currency.
Yeah.
And things like that. So it's I think from an educational perspective, I think it's the challenge to kind of make sure that people know what they're getting in comparison to, you know, something which is direct from factory or something where, you know, maybe somebody doesn't put as much thought into kind of the construction of the apparel and things like that.
So what are some of the products that you were surprised that did so well, and what has been some of your personal favorite products, would you say, that you've produced?
So I think, Matt, this is one of the issues that we have at HQ is I like almost everything, like literally 99% of the stuff that Andy Chen's out, I'm like, that's amazing. And then we have this kind of echo chamber, we're like, oh, that's amazing, that's amazing, that's amazing, that's amazing. But if I had to pick personal favorites, the koi stuff, super nice, super elegant. And the glitch model, which we've just done a re-release of, I really like also.
Yeah.
As for products that have surprised us in their popularity, I think the judo, what do we call it, Andy?
Heritage.
The heritage gi surprised me, not because there's anything about it, but it was a bit more plain. It didn't have the loud, but it did very well. Like worldwide, it was good.
Yeah. So
And what were you?
Oh yeah, I think from my perspective, I was just like not in like a conceited way, but I just kind of like everything released.
Yeah.
I mean, I designed everything.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What would you say is your proudest moment as a brand? Like, it can be like something super small, or it could be like, we hit this milestone, let's say.
I think it was when we signed our first black belt.
Right.
It was Max Campos, based in Oxford. You know, we're still working with him, so I think that's been pretty cool. I think we signed him back in 2013.
Yeah.
like pretty early, and that was a really big deal for us because I think when we started the brand, we did get pushback occasionally from customers who were kind of interested in kind of the history of the brand and where it came from. And I think at that time we were still white belts. I think we hadn't even joined a gym. We were purely just doing Gracie combatives at home.
I think I was already in.
Oh yeah, I think maybe you might have been you might have started at Carlson already, but I think when people would email us and be like, oh, can you tell me a bit more about your brand? What belt are you guys?
That's always a difficult conversation.
Yeah, and so we were like, we didn't really know that that was a thing back then. And obviously being from outside the sport and obviously trying to get as immersed as you could in a sport which was new to us, we didn't really want to offend anyone. And so when these one or two customers kind of pushed back and were like, oh, how can white belts start a brand, blah, blah, blah. For us, it kind of was a bit of a strange thing to navigate. And so then when we finally kind of got a black belt and he kind of really was quite helpful in kind of giving us tips on how to design stuff and how the gis fit, and that was probably my proudest moment, I think.
It felt like it gave us an air of legitimacy.
Yeah.
With him. I think for me, coming out of the pandemic and being able to rebuild and to continue operating was pretty big. Yeah. So it's not one particular moment, but also seeing, some brands that come and go, and we're still around. And some of these brands are really good, and it's always surprising when you don't see their stuff anymore.
It's true.
So that's something for me. I think, wow, we've been around for more than 10 years now.
Yeah.
In whatever shape or form.
Yeah.
So let's say if you could, everything that you know now, let's say you can go back in time and you can give yourself a piece of advice before starting Aesthetic. What would you tell your 10 years ago when you were first starting the brand?
Probably some painfully obvious things. So Andy and I we were doing small sales for a year or two, and then we had a massive bulk order from the States. And the first thing we did is we took it out and we went on a trip and spent it. So we should have paid back the people we bought it from. We should have reinvested in new stock. We should have done some marketing, but we were just like, yes. And so so something similar like that.
Yeah.
Oh, and maybe not to fall into the trap of feeling like you needed to start a gym.
Yeah.
So we started a gym for a while, and because we're a very lean team, it stretches quite thin, and the ceiling for how much you can earn in a gym versus how much time you need to spend it. And I'm sure you know, Smack. So the amount of time you need to put into it would probably have been better spent elsewhere developing the brand.
That's a good answer. Okay.
I think something that John touched on before, it was that echo chamber thing. I think that's something that we were really cautious about was we would second guess a lot of the decisions that we made when it came to releasing products. And I think maybe really early on we were maybe a bit too worried about people pleasing. Like, this hasn't been done before. People might take it the wrong way. And I think over time we've just kind of learned that, stuff that we're really proud of is stuff that we've kind of doubled down on and just released it anyway because, we thought, we're happy with it and we really like it. And so it's like that quote, right, which is, you can be the juiciest peach ever, but people just don't like peaches. Like some people just don't like peaches. So for me, it's kind of like, you can do everything right, but there's always going to be somebody who's gonna hate on you or not like it.
Another question I always wanted to ask was, how did you come by the brand slogans? So the first one was I don't know which one came first, but the current one that you guys are using quite a lot is Define Your Legacy. One of my favorite ones. But before that, you had t-shirts. I remember buying, I can't remember which t-shirt it was, but it was years ago. It was no guts, no glory, no legend, no story. How did you come up with those ones?
I think when we were really early on, we had the really good opportunities to train with some proper legends of the sport in the UK. And I think just in discussions that a lot of their students were having were a lot about kind of that theme of what are you leaving behind? What kind of legacy are you going to be kind of carving out for you as an athlete? And I think being in that, being in those circles and being around greats like Roger and Legato and all these incredible athletes kind of got us to think about what kind of direction we wanted to push the brand into and kind of what we stood for ultimately. And I think we used No Guts, No Glory for I think that was the first one that we used. And I really like that one, but it does come across as quite strong and aggressive, doesn't it? So I think we kind of sat down and we kind of discussed what slogan we would have, which kind of spoke to something a bit bigger than yourself and spoke about your actions. And I think I really like that one because it's so applicable to kind of everything you do in your life.
Yeah. How do you find the difference in the business culture, East versus West, would you say? I mean, obviously you guys have been brought up in the UK as well, so you understand how the culture works over there. Lived in the UK for 18 years myself. I know a big difference between doing business there and, for example, doing business in Thailand and doing business in Japan as well. Do you see there's, what are some distinct differences, would you say?
That's an interesting question, Mac. I think I was surprised. I mean, I only started thinking about this after you prompted it, but the differences between East and West and how we do business there is not as big as you would seem. I think because the overriding commonalities of jiu-jitsu culture seem to take precedence. So what I mean by that is things like the importance of meeting face to face, the importance of knowing who you're doing business with, the importance of being introduced from someone you know. So I would say that's more of the business culture, and that's how we've done most of our business in aesthetic, is usually through introductions to people you already know, and through training, through making those connections.
And yeah, it's pretty consistent worldwide, I would say. Like, and it makes a big difference when you travel to the country that you're working with, travel to the country of the partner that you're going to be working with, and putting a face to a name, and that really does kind of break a lot of ice.
I guess you guys have a pretty unique insight into, let's say, which countries are growing in terms of jiu-jitsu. You guys can maybe comment on in terms of numbers that in terms of goods that you're selling, for example. And if you say if you're looking at places in Asia right now in terms of growth, where do you think in Asia is growing exponentially right now?
I think in terms of per capita, it's probably Singapore. Don't have the hard data to back it up. In terms of numbers, probably China, just because there's so many people out there. So yeah, probably those two countries.
Yeah.
You don't really get to see a lot from China just because they don't use Facebook and Instagram. I don't really use WeChat that much either, so it's hard to tell, But we get a lot of Brazilians traveling through after they've done a few years in China. And I heard there's quite a lot of Alliance associations in China now all over. Have you guys had a chance to travel around China a little bit?
We haven't. We were in China in March this year, visiting one of our partners and doing some tours of the factories, but not for a training tour, sadly. But yeah, I probably agree with John. I think the talent that's coming out of Singapore is pretty scary.
Yeah, I met the Lim brothers.
Yeah.
They're pretty incredible.
Yeah.
I met Noah, and I think he's I don't know, is he doing, he's going to be a surgeon or something like that, right? I think.
Yeah, I think he was a full-time med student, which is...
Yeah, and his jiu-jitsu is on par with all of Asia in terms of the national teams right now. So it's pretty incredible. Obviously, right now you're in a niche which is jiu-jitsu, but do you guys have any aspirations as a brand to branch out beyond jiu-jitsu gear? Because I've seen some fitness stuff coming out recently.
Yeah.
And I was obviously when you see Matt Benyon with Scramble, he's doing an athletic brand as well.
Yeah, that's great.
I like that.
Yeah, I think the athletic stuff is low hanging fruit. I had this crazy idea a while ago. I really wanted to make a pair of golf shorts.
That's awesome.
And I was thinking, because you know how fight shorts are very stretchy and they help you, they don't restrict your mobility. I had this great, and then I told Andy, I was like, And turns out, I think that probably wouldn't have been a great idea, but I'd have loved to have done that.
Yeah, I think the focus for the time being was always to kind of double down on jiu-jitsu and really make sure that we did everything we wanted to do in that sport and got into a place where we were really happy with the product consistency and the releases, and we didn't really want anything to distract us from that for the time being.
I must admit though, some of the feedback I've gotten with the collaboration rash guards we made recently, the feedback has been incredible. A lot of people, with one of my partners is a trade deal with a couple of the UK based brands, and they bring back quite a lot of stuff because it's hard to get UK based stuff in Asia. And after comparing in terms of product quality, they just say aesthetics incredible. So I've had some really positive feedback with that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
So what is the future plans for aesthetic, and what goals do you have for aesthetic?
I think we'll just continue to grow into markets where we're not currently present. I think at some point I'd like to do an aesthetic invitational competition.
Oh yeah, that'd be badass.
Yeah, and definitely these retreats were definitely a focus for us too. I think something that we've always talked about, and then it's nice to obviously do a initial run just to see how it goes, and then tweak it for next year.
And if you can, you guys want to maybe keep it in Malaysia?
No, I think we'd probably look at doing it overseas too. I think I just think it's easy for us to do in Asia just because obviously of the proximity where we are.
It's definitely a good way to market your products as well, I must say. I mean, when I saw Leon doing it in Bali as well, I thought, oh, that's a really good idea. And my last question for you guys is, who would you like to thank?
Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. I think it's, I think, you know, again, we've been really fortunate to have incredibly supportive parents who have kind of never really questioned the reasons why you'd want to start a martial arts apparel brand. And I think as Asians, that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
You know, and it's been like a long journey, and their sport's never really wavered. And I think that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
You know.
That is incredible, especially with Asian parents.
Yeah. I mean, and our partners, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
You're one of our partners, and we've, you know, again, we've been incredibly lucky to find really, really good people to work with across the regions that we're in. And yeah, I don't think we'd be here, you know, where we are if we didn't have like a great team like that.
Yeah, Mum, Dad, our Aunt Janet, who gave that initial investment, we wouldn't be here without her. My wife, who else? Kenny, who formed the other core team. Our partners.
Yeah, our partners, my wife's been
Yeah.
incredible too.
Our wives are very supportive. We'd be able to do that.
That really helps.
It does,
Yeah.
it makes a big difference.
All right. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks,
you.
Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.